Hi, everyone. This is Julie Bruns. Welcome to the Peace and Possibilities podcast. I want you to thrive and be happy, peaceful, and content, no matter where you are on your journey. This podcast shares stories that will show you how it can be done, no matter what your circumstances. You'll be inspired and come away with a new spark of an idea. Never forget, anything is possible. New episodes are released every Wednesday. Subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review. This helps others find our content and get happier sooner. To possibility and beyond. Thanks for joining me. We never met officially. We met via email. I am so excited to talk to you and hear your story. I know that you and David are friends, and I just met a couple of months ago. I just want to tell you a quick story about him, and I don't know how long you've known him, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about it. But at the end of the day, I just simply reached out to him because I read a story about him in a book that I was reading over the summer about entrepreneurship, and his story was in there, and I thought he had a really cool story, and I just went on LinkedIn and sent him a quick message and said, I would love to interview you for my podcast. Would you be interested? And I think within like a half an hour, he got back to me and said, count me in, like with exclamation points. And I'm like, who is this guy that I don't even know that's being so gracious? And I just loved it. And I'm like, who are you? And thank you for saying yes. And why did you say yes? And he's like, because you asked me and something about it just told me to say yes to you. And I'm like, you're awesome. And now I love talking to him. And then he said, I'm friends with Hap, and I'm sure he'd love to do your podcast. If I asked him, he'd be interested, and I'll reach out. And I said, well, that would be phenomenal, and thank you. And what did I do to deserve this? And I still don't understand it, but here we are. So two more people.
All good things.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know much about your story. I know about I know about what you've accomplished in as far as the North Face goes. So I just want to say I'm here with Hap Klopp, the founder. Would it be the co-founder or the founder of the North Face?
Consider it the co-founder. It's too lengthy a story without that.
Okay. And I also found it interesting. I just noticed when I saw something recently that your name is Hap. I was going to ask you where the name came from, and I saw it's your first name, Kenneth.
The first name is Kenneth. The nickname, which I've had since birth, is Hap. And I write under the name Hap. I teach under the name Hap, and most people don't know Kenneth. So.
Oh, wow. I thought it was interesting because that's my husband's middle name, and that's his father's name. And
really?
Yeah, you don't hear that name very often these days anymore. So I thought that was interesting. So I just wanted to get a background on that. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So let me just say the purpose of this conversation is to inspire and enlighten and show people what's possible. And when I say people, men, women, young, old, it doesn't matter. I want people to know that they don't have to start their lives dreading going to work every day, and they can find peace and things to be happy about no matter where they are in their life. And I want to share stories with people that I want to share stories from people that have accomplished that and help so that others don't have to wait so long to get where people like you have gotten. How does that sound?
That sounds great. I was pretty lucky in that I ended up choosing a field which I cared about and a lot of people I knew cared about, which was the outdoors and backpacking and things. And that makes it pretty easy to get excited about it versus a more abstract thing that would maybe be distant from me. And that goes to one of the questions of, how do you get really charged up about what you're doing? And I think it all starts with try to find out what it is you're passionate about, and that becomes the area that you take a job in. Don't just search out the highest salary, or don't search out the thing that is trendiest at the moment, but rather what you do is really assess yourself. What is it that I think about when I wake up? What is it I think about when I'm going to sleep? And try to find a career around that.
I love that. That's so true. Never heard it said that way when you said, what do you think about when you go to sleep? And what do you think about when you wake up? And it's so funny because once I launched this business just a couple of months ago, and I was telling my husband, I can't stop thinking about it. And I've never felt that way about, I've always liked the work I've done and I've always been good at it
Mhm.
and training and development, but I've never only wanted to think about this. And I think
Yep.
just like you said, what do you think about in the morning? What do you think about when you go to sleep? That's awesome. That's great advice. So what did
Good.
you, when you started your career, did you say, oh, I think it'd be cool someday to own my own company? Or did you just kind of say, I like business, or I'll try this, or I'll try that? And how did you fall into this work?
Well, it goes back quite a ways, but when I was in university, I went to Stanford and was an undergraduate there. And when I was a senior, my father died, and we had a family business that made wood windows, frame, sash, and door. And while we'd put all the windows in the Empire State Building and the Chicago Merchandise Mart and Levittown and such, we were still
Mhm.
quite small compared to the big players Weyerhaeuser, Boise Cascade, Anderson Window Wall, Pella, all those people were there. So I was tasked while I was finishing my senior year at Stanford to also run the company and try to figure out what our path was going forward. And over the course of that time, I analyzed and did a deep dive on where we were. And I realized that we were going to have to do a number of things if we wanted to thrive. One was we're going to have to move the plant and the facilities. Another one, we're going to have to raise tens of millions of dollars. And we're going to have to add to the management team a significant number and let some of the people go, people I'd known my whole life. And that was pretty daunting for somebody who's about 20 years old.
Mhm.
And so I concluded the best strategy would be to sell the company. So what I did was go back to Stanford. I got into the MBA program, and while I was in the MBA program, I had three jobs. One was being an MBA, another one was running the company, and the third one was negotiating the sale of the company. And
Mhm.
fortunately, after the end of the first year, it was a 2 year program, I sold the company. And so then I was liberated to be able to go out and seek out what I wanted to do. And nobody offered me a job to run the company. I was surprised because here I'd already run a company and I had an MBA, but there weren't a lot of those jobs around. And I had some very unsuccessful interviews with large companies. I didn't fit there, and I knew I didn't fit there. I knew I had some really idiosyncratic ideas. I thought women should be paid the same as men. I didn't see why there was discrimination against people because of ethnic heritage or sexual persuasion or things. I didn't believe in planned obsolescence. I didn't believe in many of the things that were the run of the day. So I did interview with a few people. I ended up with a interview with Procter and Gamble that made me conclude that that was big business and I didn't fit there. So I was then had to task with coming up with something I was going to do. And I concluded if I couldn't work for anybody else, then probably what I should do is start my own company. And one of the things I knew something about was the out of doors. I knew that because when you're raised in Spokane, Washington, that's what you do in your spare time. There aren't a lot of other activities there.
Mhm.
And so I had a pretty good idea of what good product was and what bad product was. And I thought that was a basis on which I could actually build a business. And it started out really around camping. And then we disrupted the camping business because I knew from personal use and firsthand use that many of the products were too heavy, were not sufficiently working, and I thought you could disrupt it by bringing materials in from the Vietnam War. We converted aircraft aluminum into tent poles and pack frames. We converted the parachute cloth into sleeping bags and tent tops and some funky clothing. And what we did was lighten the load that people carried by about 50%. And people started going into the wilderness miles, not just a few hundred feet. And women joined the activity because it wasn't a beast of burden act any longer. And what we did is create a new industry, which was backpacking. And then we constantly were disrupting by bringing new materials, new ideas, new construction ideas in. But we were going to insinuate all the ideas that I talked about that we believed in, that we spoke 14 languages at all times in our factory as we developed it. Women paid the same as men. We hired anybody from anywhere uh, because we wanted the best. We didn't have any profile, just if they were going to be good, they could help us build what we were going to do. And so I was very determined to be able to develop that. initially it was sort of backpacking. As Gore-Tex came along, it allowed us to move into skiing and develop a unique product there. And we did that, and our tent sales slowed down. And I had a contact that I knew, a philosopher genius by the name of Buckminster Fuller. And Bucky was one who had found geodesic domes and such, along with many other things. And went to him, and he said he would help us if we put together a team. He'd mentor the team on how to create a revolutionary design for tents. So it was about disruption that we did. It was about having a triple bottom line business. It was about sort of living things that I believed in, which was making the best. I believe in the highest quality. I said I didn't believe in planned obsolescence. So one of the things we did, and many people thought it was crazy, but we created a lifetime warranty on the product, and it was fantastic. It was a great marketing comment, but it also told everybody involved with the product, whether they're a maker or seller or distributor or consumer, where we stood on the grid of product.
Wow, you said you said so much. I have so many questions. So the values that you were talking about, those values of just at such a young age, you were saying 20 years old, just wanting, were they good? Men or women, where they came from, what language they spoke, it didn't matter. It was, were they good, and are they interested in making the best products? Where did you learn that from, or did you just always have that moral character, those values? Where did that come from?
Well, I spent a lot of time working at a variety of jobs, uh, and even while I was in school, I worked at the company that we had, the family company, and before that, I created a school store when I was in grade school, and I even was yeah, trapping gophers when I was about 9 years old to be able to sell the tails so we could make flies for fly fishing out of them. So I always had sort of a background of wanting to be in business and thought I could probably be in that. And but while I was doing it, of course, I was assessing the outside world, and I always worked and was around a variety of people in a variety of jobs. And if you aren't just academic, if you have sort of real world experience, you tend to develop ideas which you think are the right ones, the correct ones, many of which tied to what you're doing. I mean, the other part was that after I left Stanford, I moved to Berkeley, and Berkeley was a hotbed at that time, and still is somewhat, of revolutionary ideas and ideas that are sort of socially forward. And so, from the people that you surround yourself with in a community like that around a liberal university, it adds to the philosophies that you have, or solidifies them, or maybe encourages you them to step out and speak about them, when in fact more just academic study wouldn't lead you to that conclusion.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Which is, we have two boys. One just graduated college, one's about to graduate high school, and we've always taught them. We've all, hard work and treating people equally, and having compassion and all of those. But I think are great values. But it's like the more they're exposed to different people and lifestyles, and talking to people about where they grew up from, and hardships, and not everyone has what you had, and is born in the country that you were born in, and all of those things, and just to have those open eyes, and
Hmm.
experiences, just is so important to molding their character and who they want to be later. And it sounds like you had some good people in your life to help you with all of that. So I know you said your dad died when you were younger, but it sounds like your mom, well, both of them, I'm sure, were influential to a degree.
Well, the parents helped, and I had some teachers who were really quite forward thinking. It turned out that I didn't realize till later on I was probably had ADD or something, and I was very disruptive in class. But what they did from the fifth grade on, fifth through eighth grade, is they just allowed me to go do whatever I wanted to do. I opened the school store at that time. One of my teachers gave me directed reading, things like philosophers and Kant and Hegel and Marx and people, to try to analyze that. And I also played sports with all the teams that existed out there. So I said that later on, I reflected on the fact I was probably disruptive in class, and they were trying to figure out how to get me out of the class.
Yeah.
But as a result of it, it allowed me to have really an eclectic experience at a very young age, and the self confidence to believe that being different was good.
So important that you experience teachers like that, and kudos to them for being so forward thinking back in that time, because they could have easily just kept trying to squash you, but instead they said, okay, let him go do these things, and they were so smart to do that, instead of just wanting you to conform, and you would have
Hmm.
been able to grow the way you did. Oh, that's awesome. What do you think when you're in your 20s and you decide you're going to start your own company? In those beginning years, how long was it until you were considered super successful and founded the North Face? How many years between that 20-year-old kid that wanted to start a company and with the camping, and then the North Face? How many years were in between those?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, if you're ever going to start a business, you have to be thinking far into the future, and you have to be thinking about your success, and you're sort of drawn to that by the ideas you have. Uh, so we believed we had a higher profile from the day we started than we did, and so to a certain degree, we felt we were successful. But in terms of feedback, you're on a razor's edge all the time between abject failure on one hand,
Mm-hmm.
and the other hand is remarkable success. I
Mm-hmm.
would say that the one thing that actually made me realize that we'd made it somewhat, we always wanted to build a brand. I always believed in a brand because a brand is an annuity for future sales. A brand is something that exists. A brand is a definition of your DNA. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something that you're marketing. It's what your entire company lives. And if you can do that and do it consistently over time, you develop a brand that exists for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
what we wanted was a brand that endured and a brand that people would recognize. And we did a small survey at one point in our development. It was probably about 10 years in, and we asked people. We were trying to find out which product they liked best, and so we could focus on that. So we didn't produce everything. We produced the ones that were there, and why did they like it, and all of those sort of quantitative or qualitative things that we would ask. And I read one note, and it was the one that made me feel we'd succeeded because the customer said, I don't know exactly what you make, but I know you make good shit. And I knew that we'd accomplish it. One, it gave us the latitude to do a lot of things, and the second thing was we transcended any given product in that person's mind to actually being a company that endured with a philosophy and a life of its own.
Interesting. It's so interesting that you remember that from so long ago too, that comment. Like this things stick with you, right? The way people say things sometimes.
Sure,
That's so
sure.
cool.
Both positive and negative, I think.
Of course, of course. So
Hmm.
when you look back on your success at the North Face and um, you know, your success as a young entrepreneur too, when you think about um, what you endured and um, all of your values, and I'm already impressed with some of the things that you said you believe so young. And what do you think helped you to be that person that said, I'm going to try this and I'm going to survey these people and I'm going to see what people want and I'm going to go here to this person and see if they can make something different for me. What were some of those traits that made you successful taking those risks and reaching out to people early on and even now?
Some of it was self confidence, and I think the self confidence came from uh, sport, which I participated in, activities that I was involved in when I was in school. I ran probably 20 different clubs. Undergraduate at Stanford, I even ran a couple of them. But in doing that, you put yourself on the line and you make some decisions, and people respect you for what you're doing. So that made me believe that I was a leader, made me believe that I could communicate, gave me the skills to be able to be articulate. I had a good vocabulary and I was able to articulate it, and that made some people follow me because they thought I made sense when I was doing things. All of that really helped, but it was a self confidence that came from those activities. And coupled with, I think, a very eclectic amount of knowledge. As I said, when I was in grade school, I only spent half the day in class, and the rest was out working on everything from sport to Kant and Hegel and Marx, and to developing a school store. And in high school, I was doing a variety of things, participated in many sports that were competitive, but also was looking at academic things. I ran the Red Cross for a while in the city where I was in, and I felt I could go ahead. And when I got to college, I at Stanford, I decided I wasn't going to take one of the standard majors. I was going to create my own, and it took 15 advisors before they finally agreed that I could do that. But I again took an eclectic group of things. I was studying things like industrial engineering, political science, art, architecture, about the space and the going into the moon, which we hadn't at that time, but we're on the verge of doing. Uh, I took courses on all of that, and then I defined it, which helped me get into business school. But I designed it and called it executive management, which had kind of cool cachet to it,
Yeah.
I guess. And the business school accepted that. But the reality was that variety of input that I had and the audacity to go off and do things in my own way made me believe that doing things out of step with the rest of the people is actually the way to lead, as opposed to being out of step, meaning you're really wrong and you'll never make it. And I had self confidence from taking risk early on and getting rewards from risk, measured risk as I went along, whether it was physical risk or whether it was intellectual risk or whether it was business risk. Those were all the kind of the same, and they kind of melded together when I founded the business.
That is so fascinating. I grew up with in a really big family, and then we just have two boys now. But
Hmm.
my parents were always saying to us, it needs to be a variety. Obviously, being a good student is going to help you, but you have to be well-rounded. Well-rounded was the term they always use, and we don't really use that term anymore now. But thought the same thing for our boys. We thought, obviously being smart is going to help you, but being in sports, being a team player, working, learning what it means to earn a dollar and spend your money, and not just have things handed to you. There's so many good lessons in
Yep.
parenting, obviously, that apply to business. But when you don't um, fit into a mold, or you say, that's not for me, I want this instead. I mean, even at a young age, it's so impressive to say, I don't think I want that, I'm going to try this instead. Our younger ones way
Hmm.
more, it looks at things and says, that's not fitting, I want to do this. Okay, try that instead. Or I know I'm a good athlete,
Hmm.
but I want to draw, and I'm interested in music too, and I want to do this. And to embrace all of those things early on, because like you said, you don't have to fit into a mold. People think we do, but all of the things that are created now that we get to enjoy, products and services and things out in the world, have been created by people just like you, who said, I'm going to try something else. We wouldn't
Yep.
have the iPhone if it was for that. We wouldn't have the North Face. We wouldn't have products that we love, and make our lives better, if people just always went with what fit with the mold. Everyone would have the same thing.
Well, it sounds like you're training the boys well, and that's good. I think being able to fail and realizing it's not the end of the day is really one of the great learning experiences. I think it was Edison who said, I've never failed. I've just found 10,000 ways something doesn't work. But
Mm-hmm.
also, if you look at Silicon Valley and some of the people there, Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple. Then they brought him back when he learned how to play well with others. Mark Andreessen founded Netscape, and he too, they let him go, and he ended up founding one of the top venture capital firms. And you go on and on and on. And people in this area where I live, which is the Silicon Valley area, really realize the value of failing forward and failing fast. And once it's not a stigma, and once you're not afraid of failing, you can take outside risk, you can take outside chances, you can take moonshots, and you can do things differently because you're not afraid any longer. And so it's a great thing to learn, and that happens not overnight, but it happens, it builds over time as you try some things that don't work and you find, okay, I'm not very good at that, or, I could be good at
Mm-hmm.
something else. And I always found sport, I happen to like sport, but sport is one of those things that teaches you you're not going to win every time you go out and play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, because part of it is the joy of playing beyond everything. And the other one is you're going to survive even if you do fail at that. And so I competed in sports, in football in high school, tennis in high school. I played football for a couple of years in college and wasn't good enough to make it to the pros, so I switched to wrestling and took up wrestling and was able to letter in that and finish third on the coast. But I tried that. But simultaneously, I would get involved in all the intramural sports and try what I could. And I ended up winning the intramural wrestling title at Stanford, the intramural football
Mm.
title with the team we had. Ended up intramural boxing title I won, the intramural tennis title I won, all because I was competing and
Yeah.
trying to do that, but at the same time accepting I wasn't going to win every time, and I certainly wasn't going to be the best at it. And
Hmm.
then when you start running your own business, if you can translate that into the fact you don't have to be the smartest to be the leader, you can collect a lot of brilliant people around you. But if you're always trying to be the smartest one, either hiring poorly or what you're doing is not allowing those people to thrive. So once you gain the self confidence to say it's okay to listen to other people and you still can be a leader, then you've learned something very valuable.
Yes, that's so true. All the great leaders. I've read a ton of leadership books, and always the people that are doing well, leading companies, and respected and revered by their employees are the ones that say, "Hey, I don't have all the answers. I'm hiring. I'm smart enough to get all the smart people around me, and ask them. If you knew if you knew everything, you wouldn't have to hire anyone to help you, right? You could just run your company by
Yep.
yourself, right?"
Well, something I've observed over time and now really believe in is the fact that all great ideas seem to come in the valley between disciplines. They don't come from an individual who's just really skilled in one discipline. So even if you're in Silicon Valley and you're a great computer scientist, you're going to have to be combined with mechanical engineers or people who are marketing specialists, people finance specialists to create a great company. And oftentimes when people launch and start a business, they surround themselves with their best friends who are exactly like themselves and don't have people who tell them no or don't have people with a different perspective because of different training. And
Yeah.
that inhibits the growth of that company. But if you can collect those people and enjoy them, even though they have a different perspective, then you start having a real fire under your business and you create something which is bigger than any of the individuals themselves could make it.
Yes, so true. So true. Have you written a book? If you haven't, you should. Have you written books?
I've written two books.
Okay.
I've written two. Actually, I've written three books. I didn't like one, so we don't talk about it much. But it was kind of a how-to book, and what I really like to do is tell stories. And when I tell stories, they're parables, and they're more memorable. So I wrote one on success, which was called "Conquering the North Face," and it took stories from North Face. It took stories from the out of doors, from my own experience, from competitors, and wove that into a way of how to be a leader and what success was
Yeah.
all about. And I wrote a second book called Almost, which is about a failure of a Silicon Valley company I was trying to help that was in wearable technology. And they should have succeeded. They had everything that they possibly could need. They had students from graduates, some of the brilliant graduates from Stanford, Naval Academy, Carnegie Mellon, had a couple of astronauts in there, had a person who was an admiral in that, and raised millions of dollars to be able to create a wearable technology product, and the company failed. And so I tell it in story fashion so that people can learn from it. The old OPM, other people's money. It's good to learn other people's
Mhm.
mistakes, but also it's meant to be entertaining. But there's four or five reasons that are embedded in there that the company failed. That if one reads it, they would understand that and hopefully not replicate it.
Yeah. Good. I'm so glad you did that instead of how to be. So you have the kind of the two spectrums. One is how the success, and then the other one is this failed and how it failed, so people can learn from it. Because obviously, you almost always learn more from your failures, right? And your
Oh,
successes,
sure.
anyways. Yeah.
I will say that when I was getting the book published, not everybody agreed with that. They said, "Well, go into a bookstore, look to see how many books are there on failure, and then look to see how many are there on success and leadership." And I said, "Well, maybe the reason bookstores are having so much problem is they don't have some on failure." But
Mm-hmm.
the reality is you do learn more because you're more introspective about failures. When you
Mm-hmm.
succeed, it may just be luck, it may just be timing, or at least a good portion of it may be those things. But you don't go back to make that assessment. You just sort of ascribe it to your own genius and what you've done. When you fail, there's no genius there, and you keep going. What could I have done differently? Why should I
Mm-hmm.
do that? How could that have happened? Was it a bad idea? Was it bad execution? Was I wrong in that whole thing? that sort of introspection helps you in terms of the next project you take on.
For sure. And everyone I think can relate more to failures because everyone has experienced them at some point in their life,
Mm.
probably multiple times. And when you're talking about failure, you're talking about vulnerability and you're sharing something that didn't work well, and everyone can feel compassion for people like that. Um,
Yep.
Everyone wants to learn how to be successful, but it's in those stories that you really, you really can relate to people. That's awesome.
One of the advantages of being in a place like Silicon Valley where you're there is they embrace failure,
Mm,
and it's not a negative. And in fact, some of the VCs I've talked to said they would not invest in a company unless they saw a few people in management who tried some things and failed. For the reasons we talked about, you learn more from failure. Also, you have to make fast decisions in Silicon Valley because companies are scaling very fast. So you don't have time for organic analysis of things. You have to intuitively know what to do, and that doesn't happen everywhere in the world. I ran a company in New Zealand, and I ran a company in Scotland, and I have a lot of friends running companies in other places. And in some of those environments, if you fail, it's the end of the world. You can't bounce back. So
mm,
they create a stigma or an aura around anybody who even tries to do things. I believe
yeah.
that in New Zealand, the phrase is called the tall poppy syndrome, which is the tall poppy is cut down, which means if you're really aggressive and stand out, and particularly if you stand out with failure, then everybody is going to be negative about you. So I
Yeah,
try to
right.
encourage people to adopt that Silicon Valley mentality, that scalable mentality, that mentality of taking risk and shooting for the moon so you can come up with something which is extraordinary as opposed to something which is incrementally better.
I love that. I'm going to go to our last question because you kind of answered one of the other ones earlier when you talked about, instead thinking about what do you think about when you wake up and what do you think about when you go to bed. I think that's a great
Yep.
way to think about your strengths and what you want to offer the world. What would you say?
Mm.
I don't want to talk so much about regrets. I just want to talk about um, what would you wish that you something you've done but you wish you had done a little bit sooner, or something you wish you had learned earlier, um, that would have made more of an impact on your life earlier?
Well, doing something sooner probably wouldn't be an issue for me. I was doing things sooner than almost anybody else I was around. I was running a company when I was 20, and was founding a company when I was 22. I was going after those things, and I was doing it with audacity uh, and maybe some naivete. But
Mm,
had I known uh, one thing, it would have been really beneficial to me, and that was the business model that I followed was a standard business model for the apparel and footwear business, which basically limited the amount of growth you could have. But juxtaposed to that, we had an industry that was growing dramatically, and we had a team that I put together that really was very aggressive. So we were growing 100% a year for many years, but the financial structure only allowed about 20%. So it meant that we had to constantly be refinancing either with debt or equity in other ways to be able to keep up the trajectory we were on. Now, the solution to that was probably twofold, neither one which we jumped on. One was to change the financial model to be able to grow, to come up with other ways to come up with capital, which could be through distributorships in certain areas. It could be through financing from your vendors that want to see you grow. And Nike certainly did that. Nike used a strategy. They used a trading company in Japan, Nisho Iwai, that funded them from production all the way through till the retailers paid or the retailers received the goods. And in doing that, they changed the model.
mm,
Certainly, going direct to consumer changes the model. The other alternative we could have had was to grow slower. Now, that would have required, in our case, changing the team because the team had this aggressive mindset that they were doing, and we were setting these aggressive goals, and we thought we were doing a great thing. But had I realized the limitations of the financial model that we had, it would have helped tremendously. I was more focused on brand, I was more focused on marketing, I was more focused on product, I was more focused on product use, all of which are good things, but probably didn't recognize the constraints imposed by the financial model, and probably could have gained a lot by looking at that more in depth when I was developing the company.
Yeah. It certainly didn't stop you from being successful later on, but I mean, you live and learn, right? And you didn't have
Yep.
all the expertise you would have had at that young age too. So to be able to know everything about how everything's going to work well um, is nearly impossible. So you were going towards the strengths for sure.
Hmm.
Thank you. So, any closing thoughts, Hap, about your life and being happy at work and along the way as you were building things? Like what kept you grounded and happy and knowing that, what you were working for mattered or anything you'd like to say about
Well,
that?
it takes joy in the people you work around you. You know, if you have the great people that you work with, that is a reward in and of itself. And I wouldn't build a business to sell it, even though a lot of people do that today. I build a business to make it great, and it will take care of itself in terms of what the exit is later on. And take joy in the products you produce, take joy in the service you produce, take joy with the people you work in, and it becomes fun. Not every day, but most days,
Yeah.
and so that's good. And there are two quotes that we used at North Face that I found I put up on the wall, one of the design department and one in the marketing department. But they kind of guided our thinking, which is a more positive way of thinking. And that one of them was from Goethe, which was saying, whatever you can do or believe you can, begin it. Because beginnings and boldness have genius, power, and magic in it. And we always looked at things that way. The
I
other
love
one,
it.
which we put in our design department, was uh, taken from Rudyard Kipling's book, Mary Gloucester. And then the quote there was, they copied all they could copy, but they couldn't copy our minds. So we left them sweating and stealing a year and a half behind. And that sort of
Mm.
guided our philosophy. We didn't want to spend a lot of money on lawyers to fight competition or to fight people who were replicating our product. We spent that amount of money on creating new, innovative products. We did that because of probably three things. The first one was we didn't believe in the Malthusian part of business. It was written up in the Harvard Business School as the difference between the pie slicers and the pie enlargers. The pie slicers are Malthusian in their thinking. They think that the business is finite, and what the competition gets, they take from you, or vice versa. What you get, you take from them. The pie enlargers think with great ideas, we make the pie bigger for all. We always had the belief that we could make the pie bigger by innovation and doing that. The second
Mm.
thing that really came from that mentality of creating new product was that you were constantly creating things that had a need that didn't exist before. You weren't trying to just incrementally grow by adding a color or adding incrementally. You were really doing something revolutionary. And the third one was in doing that, we could then set up a higher purpose goal for what we were doing. So we always believed from the day one that we were going to change the world. Sure, it's hubris and whatever, and maybe it's Berkeley thinking, but at the time we started the company, the free speech movement was starting in Berkeley, and Mario Savio was one person who created the change and got us out of Vietnam. It really built from there. One man went on the moon at that time, so there was a great belief that one man could really accomplish a lot,
Mm.
and we did that with our thinking, and we thought that we could change that. And what we saw was the problems, the urban problems that existed. Vietnam War was a big thing at that time, but was not a solution to man's problems. So we thought that, and Thoreau wrote about it, and I think Elliot Porter wrote about it, but in the wilderness is the preservation of Earth. And we believed if we could facilitate taking people to the wilderness, they would come back with a more balanced perspective on the world, and they would be bigger contributors. So we felt we were changing the world by creating products that allowed people to go out and do that. That higher level purpose gave us fuel to put up with the day-to-day setbacks that you encounter in any business.
Mm. Yeah, it's like seeing that the bigger perspective and looking at it long term instead of just that short term. And when you're passionate about doing those things like changing, like you said, innovation and making the pie bigger for everyone and solving the problems, innovating things, innovating products, creating things that people can use that are going to make their lives better. It's like all that's big picture, big ambition, but um, driving all the other little mini decisions, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome.
And there's so many great opportunities out there now that are sort of carefully disguised as impossible situations. But if you believe you can succeed and you believe you can do those things and you're not afraid of failure, you'll give it a try and you'll be surprised how many times you end up doing something that is remarkable.
Yes, yes, and you can't do anything remarkable if you don't try and take the risks. And those are the people that are making the world a better place. So I thank you so much. I loved hearing your stories, and I can feel your energy coming through. But that you're still passionate about all the things you talked about. It's so nice. It's so refreshing to talk to people that are still excited about life and working and giving things back and making things better. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, it's nice of you to say. You're right. I am excited. I'm involved with nanoparticle companies that are doing things with fibers and fabrics that relate to apparel and things. I'm working with a company called Revive, which is doing drip therapy and genome testing to be able to allow people to actually proactively work on health and wellness by utilizing the genome to analyze what they need in the way of foods and nutrients to be able to take care of life rather than wait for an illness to happen and go to a doctor and have
Mhm.
their limited perspective tell you what's going on. It's
Yeah.
the democratization of healthcare. And there are three things probably that are the drivers of all the changes we see in the future: democratization, digitization, globalization. And they certainly all impact and influence something like health and wellness. So I'm very interested in that. So I work in those, and then I do some teaching, and as I've written some books and write a lot of articles for things around the globe, and I actually do the speaking too when I get the chance, and whether it's on the future of retailing in South America or with the future of the automobile market in India. uh, If people give me the forum, I'll offer my thoughts.
Oh, I love it. You should keep doing it because people like me and all generations need to hear stories about people that are still making a difference and not just, you could easily have just said, I'm done. I'm successful. I've made some money and I'm just going to go off and play golf and whatever. But it's the people that are, it's keeping you energized, right? It sounds like, and refreshed and
Yeah.
excited about changing other things. And why wouldn't you keep offering that to the world if there's these changes you can still make?
Well, one way you get energized is by the people around you. If you bounce ideas out to them and then they bounce them back to you and they've improved on them, that really can drive the energy level up. And that's when I say put a great team together, allow them to fail, measure them, clearly
Mhm.
measure them so that you aren't just risking everything when you do that, but don't have to make all the decisions yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. Spoken like a true leader, for sure. You don't have to make all the decisions yourself. That's a great book title there for you.
Yep. Fair enough. Mhm.
Yeah, well, thank you so
Well, I
much
hope
for
I've
taking
answered some of your questions, and I hope it's meaningful for the podcast.
it is and it will be, and people will be enthralled by your stories and I'm sure everyone will enjoy it just like me. So I really appreciate your time, Hap, and I'm so glad that David made the introduction and thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I will. You too.
All
Take
right.
care.